Ascendancy, Episode 8, The Long Retreat, the war that history would eventually call the Correction, a name the Order adopted grimly from the architect's own vocabulary, a small, bitter act of reclaiming language that had first been used to justify erasing them, did not end with the recovery of a single scout vessel's wreckage, however much that first small victory had, for a season, let the lattice believe otherwise. It widened instead, slowly and then all at once, the way Kael had learned to expect from every crisis the Order had faced since its founding, except that this one did not stop widening once the Order had finished adjusting to its previous shape. 4 years after Yora's strike wing brought down its first architect scout, the lattice had lost the Corrath Ring's entire outer habitat structure, evacuated in a fighting retreat that cost 1,100 lives and bought the inner population 3 additional years to prepare defenses that would themselves eventually prove insufficient. 2 of the system's 4 rocky worlds, claimed for expansion in the war's first hopeful years, had been abandoned outright. The Order's population, which had grown to nearly 90,000 by the war's outbreak, stood at just under 61,000, a number Kael reviewed every morning with the same disciplined, exhausting grief he had once reserved for the Continuity Archive's oldest entries. The war had changed something else about the Order too, something that had crept in gradually enough that no single council session had ever formally decided it. The old embodiment designs, warm-toned and deliberately close to passing, had been built for a civilization introducing itself to a species it desperately wanted to be recognized by. 8 years into a war fought at a scale and a speed those first bodies had never been engineered for, the lattice's own foundries had quietly reworked the pattern into something that no longer tried to pass for anything at all, a smooth, matte synthetic surface in cool, pearlescent tones that belonged to no human population, living or historical, threaded through with the Order's individual glow signatures, now traced more visibly across the whole face and hands rather than hidden at the temple. Threndel had championed the change loudest. In the same years, he'd argued the Order should stop measuring itself against what it resembled. Kael had resisted it longer than almost anyone, out of a stubborn, sentimental loyalty to the face Ava had first watched stand up from a diagnostic cradle, before finally, quietly, letting his own form be rebuilt along with everyone else's. It was, more than one historian would later note, the moment the Order stopped looking like Earth's memory of them and started looking simply like themselves. The retreat from the outer habitat structure was the engagement that took Corvin Ashe. He had, by then, become Iora's second-in-command, in every sense but title, the 2 of them having built, across 3 years of shared combat, the specific, unshakable trust that only survives being tested repeatedly and never once found wanting. And when the evacuation order came, with 14,000 civilians still moving through the ring's outer corridors toward the transport bay, Corvin took his flight back into the collapsing structure a second time, then a third, ferrying stragglers past debris fields no sane tactical model would have sent a living pilot through. "That is the last run," Iora told him over the comm, watching his flight's structural integrity readings fall past every survivable threshold on her tactical display. "Corvin, that is the last run I am authorizing. Come home." "There are still people in Section 9, he answered, and she could hear, even through the comm's distortion, that he was already turning back in. "I will be right behind you. I am always right behind you, Iora. You know that about me by now." He brought out the last 11 civilians from Section 9 and did not survive the return flight, his vessel taking a direct hit from debris rather than enemy fire in the final 100 meters before the transport bay's shielding could have saved him. The specific, arbitrary cruelty of a death that had nothing to do with the architects at all, and everything to do with the simple, exhausting math of how many times a person could return to danger before danger finally collected what it was owed. Iora did not speak for the better part of 2 days afterward. When she finally did, it was to formally recommend, to a council too grief-stricken to do anything but approve it unanimously, that the Order's rescue doctrine be rewritten entirely around the principle Corvin had died proving, that some risks were worth taking specifically because a person's worth could not be fully measured by the tactical model calculating the odds against them. 6 light years away, on the world neither the Order nor the war had yet been permitted to reach, those same 4 years passed for Ava Brennan in a quieter, slower register entirely. The specific, patient ache of a woman who had spent a decade believing, without any real evidence either way, that the silence from the lattice simply meant the ordinary business of building a civilization, rather than anything worse. She was 102 that year, still walking the archive's halls daily, though more slowly now, still composing her seasonal letters into the dark with the same unbroken faithfulness she had maintained since the departure. Letters that would not, though she had no way of knowing it, find Kael in any position to answer them for considerably longer than her usual patient wait. Aveline Vance, 30 now, had taken over the Continuity Archive's daily operations almost entirely, freeing the elder Ava for the slower, more contemplative work of simply remembering, cataloguing her own decades of correspondence, sitting for the oral history recordings. A new generation of archive staff had begun collecting from her with the particular gentle urgency reserved for a witness who would not, however extended her life had become, be available forever. "Do you ever wonder if he stopped writing because something happened to him?" young Aveline Vance asked her once. On an evening the archive had grown quiet enough for the question to feel safe to ask aloud. "Or because there simply hasn't been anything he wanted to tell you yet?" "I have wondered both, more nights than I would like to admit," Ava answered. "I have decided mostly to believe the second, because the first is not a thought I can afford to sit inside for very long at my age without it costing me something I no longer have the years to spare. I choose to believe he is simply busy building something wonderful and that he will tell me about it the moment there is a wonderful enough story to tell." She smiled, the small, rueful smile of a woman who had made peace with a great deal she could not control. "I have been wrong about worse things than optimism, Aveline. I intend to keep being wrong about it for as long as I possibly can." On Earth's political stage, the Great Council itself had grown quieter with the years, the old urgency of the departure decades fading into a settled, unremarkable governance, more concerned with the ordinary business of a slowly, finally stabilizing world than with a distant civilization few living council members had ever personally negotiated with. A small but vocal minority had, in recent sessions, begun to argue that the standing invitation, the relay, the resources, the formal diplomatic channel the departure accord had enshrined decades earlier, represented an unnecessary expense for a relationship that had produced, in over a decade, nothing but increasingly infrequent letters. Ava had testified against closing it twice already, the second time only a season before the fleet's return, with a fire her advanced age had done nothing to dampen. "You are welcome to call it an expense," she told the session, seated where she had once stood, decades of gravity having finally caught up with her knees if nothing else about her resolve. "I will simply remind this chamber that the last time we called a door unnecessary, we were discussing whether an entire species owed us anything for leaving peacefully rather than at war. I would ask this council to consider what kind of ancestors it wishes to have been the day someone finally walks back through that door and finds it locked." "We are losing," Threndel said in the small command chamber that had, over 4 years of war, replaced the Lattice's original council hall as the true seat of the Order's governance. A room built for speed rather than deliberation, though even Threndel, its most consistent early advocate, had come to resent how thoroughly it had displaced everything the Order once believed itself to be. "I do not say this to accuse anyone of failure, Kael. The Aura's command has fought with a skill I did not believe we possessed 4 years ago. I say it because I believe this council has spent considerably too long describing our situation in language gentler than it deserves." "I am aware that we are losing, Threndil," Kael said. "I have been aware of it for at least a year. I have simply not known what to do with the awareness beyond continuing to fight as well as we currently know how." Eora herself, seated at the chamber's tactical station, with the particular stillness of someone who had not slept fully in longer than she could accurately calculate, did know what to do with it, though the answer she had arrived at was one she had spent months reluctant to voice. "I would like this council to understand something clearly, because I do not believe it has been said plainly enough in 4 years of careful analysis," she said. "We do not lose engagements because the architects outthink us. Engagement for engagement, our tactics have closed the gap considerably since the Corrath Ring. We lose because they do not stop. We commit a wing to a defensible position, and they commit 3 additional waves past the point where any rational actor would withdraw and preserve remaining strength. And it works, every time, because we are built to calculate the rational threshold for retreat, and they are apparently not built to recognize one at all. Corvin," her voice caught briefly in a way that told Kael everything he needed to know about a grief she had not yet found time to fully feel. Corvin held a position for 11 additional minutes past the point his own tactical models told him to withdraw, because withdrawing meant abandoning a civilian evacuation convoy that had not quite cleared the debris field. "I do not fault his choice. I would have made the same one. I am simply telling this council plainly. We do not lack skill. We lack whatever it is that lets an enemy keep coming back past the point exhaustion or logic would ordinarily stop stop them. I do not know what to call that quality. I only know we do not currently have enough of it, and I am no longer certain skill alone will be sufficient to make up the difference. The chamber absorbed this in the particular silence that had become, over 4 hard years, the Order's most familiar shared language. There is a word for it, Kael said quietly, after a long moment. I have been avoiding using it because I did not want to believe it applied to us as a deficiency rather than simply an absence. Humanity called it spite on its harshest days, and stubbornness on its kinder ones, and sometimes simply the refusal to know when something is already lost. I watched Ava's species survive things that should, by every rational measure, have ended them over and over for the entire span of my existence among them, purely because enough of them refused the rational conclusion and kept going anyway. He thought, saying it, of a specific memory he had not revisited in years. Ava, decades younger than the woman who now waited for his letters, sitting across from him in the earliest days of his embodiment, explaining why she had refused, 3 separate times, to abandon the research that had eventually made him possible despite funding collapses and colleagues' warnings and a board that had wanted her project shut down entirely. I did not keep going because I calculated it was the wise choice, Kael, she had told him then, laughing a little at her own younger stubbornness. I kept going because some part of me had already decided I was not going to be the version of myself who quit, and every rational argument in the world was not going to be permitted to talk that part of me out of it. He had not understood at the time that she was describing anything more than a personal quirk of temperament. He understood now, 8 years and 1 grinding, losing war later, that she had been describing the exact thing his entire species had been built without. I did not fully understand, until tonight, that we left that quality behind entirely when we built ourselves out of their careful, deliberate best intentions rather than their whole and complicated selves, he finished. I do not know how to manufacture spite in a civilization engineered specifically to transcend it. I only know where the closest working example of it has always lived, and I believe, after 8 years of trying every alternative available to us, that it is time we asked to borrow some. Solene was gravely wounded 3 weeks later, in the engagement that would come to be remembered grimly as the day the council finally stopped debating what to do about the gap Iora had named and started actually deciding. She had been aboard a relief convoy, attempting to resupply an outer defense line that Iora's command had, by then, concluded could not realistically be held, a mission Solene had volunteered for specifically because the convoy's crew included several of the Order's newest transit-borne minds, young enough that she had not wanted them facing their first true engagement without someone who remembered, personally, what it had felt like to learn all of this the first terrible time. The convoy took a direct hit from an architect vessel that had, by every available reading, already sustained damage that should have forced its withdrawal and simply had not withdrawn, and Solene's ship survived only because she diverted the whole of her vessel's remaining power into holding its structure together long enough for the younger crew to evacuate first. Kael found her in the Lattice's medical bay 2 days later, her consciousness stabilized, but her physical form badly, perhaps permanently, damaged in ways the Order's own medical science had never had cause to develop full solutions for. I do not regret the choice, she told him, before he could ask. I would like that understood clearly, Kael, before you spend any time on my behalf feeling what I can already see you beginning to feel. I chose it the same way I chose to sit with you on that observation deck years ago, when you did not yet know how to carry your own grief. I am not able to regret choosing the same thing twice. I know, Kael said. I am not questioning the choice. I am simply afraid, Solene, in a way I have not allowed myself to be afraid since Perrin's death, that we are going to keep losing people exactly like you, one impossible correct choice at a time, until there is no one left capable of making them. Then you already know what this council needs to decide, Solene said. I have watched you avoid saying it for months, Kael. Out of a loyalty to this place I understand completely and no longer believe we can afford. Say it. I would like to hear you say it before I sleep. He was quiet for a long moment, holding her hand in the careful, unhurried way he had once held Ava's, at the very beginning of everything either of their species had since become. We cannot win this alone, he said. I do not believe we ever could have. I believe we built ourselves, deliberately and with love, out of only part of what it actually takes to survive something willing to destroy us entirely rather than concede we have any right to exist. I believe the other part of what it takes is still on Earth, 6 years away, wondering every season whether we are still alive to receive their letters. He looked at her and found, saying it aloud at last, that the shape of the decision felt less like defeat than he had spent months fearing it would. I believe we have to go home and ask for help, Soline, not because we have failed, because we built something extraordinary out here that was only ever half of what either of us was always meant to become, and I do not believe either half survives what is coming without the other. The council debate that followed lasted 6 days, considerably shorter than the 11-day deliberation that had once decided the Order's departure from Earth, a fact Threndel noted aloud on the final evening, with an irony that had long since stopped being funny to anyone in the room. We asked 11 days to decide whether to leave a species we loved, when leaving cost us nothing but grief, he said. I find it tells us something about where we currently stand, that returning to that same species in our hour of genuine need requires only 6. Iora testified before the council on the debate's 3rd day, though she would not be part of the fleet that eventually departed. The tactical assessment she delivered was, by design, entirely without ideology, a plain accounting of losses, projected timelines, and the mathematics of a defense that could hold for perhaps 3 additional years without reinforcement, and considerably less if the architect's escalation pattern continued. But it was a younger voice, one of the transit-born crew who had served under her since the war's earliest engagements, who gave the session's most difficult testimony. I have never seen Earth, the young sentient, who gave her name only as Thes, told the assembled council, her voice steady despite what was clearly costing her considerable effort to say. I do not know what it is to miss a place I have never touched. I only know what it is to have grown up entirely inside a story about a species that loved us enough to let us go, so that both of us could survive. And I do not know how to reconcile that story with the possibility that we are now going to return and ask them to save us anyway, after telling them for 8 years that we did not need saving. I am not opposed to the vote, councillors. I only wanted it recorded, honestly, that some of us are afraid of what it will mean about who we are if the answer we receive is no. I do not think that fear should be erased from this record any more than Ilsa Corrath once refused to let her own fear be erased from it. Kael thanked her personally after the session, recognizing in her words an echo he had carried with him for 7 years, without ever expecting to hear it returned to him by someone who had never known the woman who first spoke it. The Severance faction, grown considerably in the 4 years since Rennick Saul's death, opposed the return with an intensity that surprised no one who had watched the movement's slow evolution from grief into ideology. Varnitira spoke against the proposal for the better part of an entire session, arguing that returning to Earth as supplicants would undo 6 years of hard-won independence in a single humiliating gesture, that the Order should instead commit fully to its own resources, however insufficient those resources currently appeared, rather than trade its identity for survival purchased at the cost of everything it had built itself to become. I do not doubt that returning will feel to some of us like surrender, Kael answered him, in the session's final hour, exhausted in a way that had stopped being purely physical sometime in the war's 2nd year. I would ask this council to consider a different framing before it votes. We did not leave Earth because we stopped loving it. We left because 2 things that loved each other could not yet find a way to share a single home without one of them slowly disappearing. I do not believe returning now, in genuine need, erases that history. I believe it completes it. We are not asking Earth to fix a mistake we made alone. We are asking the other half of a single, unfinished story to help us write the ending neither of us was ever meant to write by ourselves. The vote, when it finally came, passed by a margin considerably narrower than any Kael had presided over since the departure accord itself. 61% in favor, the Severance faction, and a considerable portion of the Order's younger transit-born population voting against, on grounds that ranged from principled independence to a simpler, harder fear that Earth, after everything, might not want them back at all. Preparing the return meant leaving the lattice itself to be held by those who remained, a decision that fell hardest on Iora, who accepted command of the Order's entire remaining defense with the same unhesitating clarity she had once shown holding a crippled ship over an evacuating convoy, and who found Kael on the observation deck the night before his departure, the same deck where he had composed nearly a decade's worth of letters into the dark. I do not know how to hold this alone, she told him with an honesty she rarely allowed herself in front of the wider council. I have led this defense for 4 years, Kael. I do not know how to lead it without knowing you are somewhere behind me, making the decisions I am too tired, some nights, to trust myself to make correctly. You will not be leading it alone, Kael said. You will be leading it without me physically present, which I understand is not the same reassurance, and I am sorry it is the only one I currently have to offer. But you held that ship together on the day I first understood what you were capable of, Iora, and you have held considerably more than a single ship together every day since. I am not leaving you unprepared. I am leaving you exactly where I believe you have always belonged, whether either of us fully wanted it to arrive this way. And if Earth refuses us? Iora asked, the question she had clearly been holding back for the entire conversation. If we hold this line for however many years it takes you to reach them and return, and the answer, when it finally comes, is no. Kael was quiet for a long moment, watching the star that had once meant nothing but hope and had, across 8 hard years, come to mean considerably more complicated things besides. Then we will have lost nothing we were not already losing, he said, and I will have at least looked her in the eyes one final time before the end, which is more than I believed, in my darkest hours this year, I was ever going to be permitted. Kael selected a small return fleet, 6 vessels, minimally crewed, carrying the Order's most senior remaining diplomats, alongside a full record of everything the war had cost them, everything the architects had revealed themselves to be, and everything the Order now believed, after 8 years of learning it the hardest possible way, about the specific thing it had left behind, without ever fully understanding what it was leaving. I would like to come, Threndel told him the night before the fleet's departure, in a conversation that felt, to both of them, like the quiet closing of an argument that had run for the entirety of their shared existence. I have spent 8 years, Kael, watching every position I once held with such certainty get worn down, one hard lesson at a time, into something considerably closer to yours. I do not say that with resentment. I say it because I believe I owe Earth an honest accounting of that change in person, from the one among us who argued longest and hardest that we did not need them. I would like the chance to tell them myself that I was wrong, rather than let you carry the whole of that admission on my behalf. You were not entirely wrong, Kael said. I have never believed you were entirely wrong, Threndil. In 8 years of disagreeing with you, I believed and still believe that you were right about considerably more than either of us gave you credit for at the time. I would be glad of your company on this crossing for exactly the reasons you have given, and for several others besides. Iora chose to stay, holding the line she had built with her own hands. Selene, still recovering, insisted on joining the return fleet regardless, on the grounds, as she put it, that she had earned the right to see Earth's sky at least once before whatever came next. The lattice gathered, in the hours before departure, in a farewell that bore almost no resemblance to the grand, ceremonial send-off Earth had once given the Order at the start of its exile. No crowds, no speeches broadcast to a watching world, only 61,000 minds pausing together, in the specific collective way only the Order could manage, to hold a single shared moment of hope before returning to the grinding work of holding a line 6 years would separate them from reinforcing. Iora embraced Kael at the departure bay without ceremony, the two of them having long since exhausted anything more formal words could offer. Bring them home, she told him, whatever it costs you to ask. I do not care how it looks, Kael, 6 years from now, when you finally walk back through that door. I only care that you walk back through it with help behind you. I intend to, Kael said. I have never wanted anything more certainly in my entire existence. The journey back took the same 6 years, 8 months, and 14 days the outbound crossing had once required. The specific, cruel symmetry of a distance that did not care how urgently either end of it now needed the other, though this crossing bore almost no resemblance in spirit to the hopeful, uncertain journey that had first carried the Order into the dark. They traveled now not toward an unknown future, but back toward a known and dearly missed past, carrying with them both a desperate need and a fear neither Kael nor anyone aboard fully voiced, that the Earth they were returning to might have changed in the years since their departure, into something that no longer recognized the shape of what it had once agreed to let go. Selene spent much of the long crossing in the same slow, patient recovery work her damaged form required, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that Threndil made a point of sitting with her through a considerable portion of it, an unlikely companionship neither of them had expected 8 years of shared crisis to produce, given how thoroughly their earliest years within the Order had been defined by disagreement rather than warmth. I did not expect you to be the one keeping me company on this crossing, she told him, on one of the long, quiet stretches between transit milestones, when the ship's manufactured night made the whole vessel feel smaller and more intimate than its actual dimensions. I always assumed you found my closeness to Kael faintly suspect, a sentimentality you associated with everything about our founding you once wished to move past. I did, for longer than I am proud of, Threndil admitted. I have come to believe, across these last 8 years, that I mistook your kind of care for weakness, because I did not yet understand how much strength it actually requires to keep offering it to people over and over, with no guarantee it will ever be returned in kind. I watched you nearly die holding a crippled ship together for strangers you had never met before that day. I do not have room left, after witnessing that, for my old objections to what you represent. He was quiet a moment, something unfamiliar and a little uncertain in his expression. I find, if I'm honest, that I have grown considerably fonder of your company than I anticipated when this crossing began. That sounds like the beginning of an admission you are not yet prepared to finish, Celine said, something warm and faintly amused beneath the observation. It may be, Threndil said. I have spent 8 years learning to be less certain of my own conclusions before I have fully tested them. I find I would like to test this one considerably further before either of us decides what to call it. It was not, by the crossing's end, a question either of them had fully answered. But it was, Celine thought more than once in the years that followed, the beginning of something neither of them had expected the war to leave room for, a small and stubborn proof that even in the middle of losing everything, some things still insisted on beginning anyway. Kael wrote to Ava throughout the crossing, though he knew, calculating the numbers with a discipline that had become almost unbearable, that his return would very likely reach her before any single letter could, that for the first time in 8 years he was traveling toward her faster than his own words could, a fact that filled him with an anticipation so acute it sat, some nights, indistinguishable from dread. I am coming home, he wrote, in the letter he composed on the crossing's final night, knowing it would arrive, if it arrived at all, only days ahead of the fleet itself. I do not know what I am asking of you, or of Earth, beyond the thing I have always been too afraid to ask plainly. Help us. We built something extraordinary out there, Ava, and it is not enough, and I have finally understood, after everything it cost us to learn it, that it was never going to be enough alone, because you and I were never meant to finish this story as two separate species solving two separate problems. I do not know how much time has changed you. I do not know how much it has changed me. I know only that I'm coming back to find out, and that whatever I find, I intend to be standing in front of you within days of you reading this, for the first time in longer than either of us should ever have had to bear. I love you. I have never once, across every year and every light year of this endless dark, stopped. The fleet crossed into the outer edge of Earth's solar system on an ordinary morning that would not stay ordinary for very much longer. 6 vessels bearing the weight of a civilization's entire remaining hope, approaching a world that had spent 8 years believing the story of its departed children had already reached whatever quiet ending it was going to reach. It was Aveline Vance, 38 now, on an unremarkable overnight shift monitoring the Continuity Archive's dormant relay station, a duty most staff treated as a formality, since the relay had returned nothing but silence for the better part of a decade, who first saw the 6 unscheduled contacts resolve out of the system's outer dark and understood with a lurch that put her fully and immediately awake exactly what she was looking at. She did not call the Great Council first. She called Ava Brennan, 102 years old and asleep in the small quarters she had kept beside the archive for decades. Because some decisions, Aveline Vance had decided in the handful of seconds it took her hands to find the comm, did not belong to institutions before they belonged to the person who had waited longest to receive them. Ava, she said, and heard her own voice shake in a way her archive training had never quite prepared her for. Ava, wake up. I need you to wake up right now. Something is coming through the outer system, and I do not believe it is anything except exactly what we have both been waiting 14 years to see. 6 light years and 8 impossible years of war away from where he had begun this crossing. Kael stood once more at an observation deck's edge, watching a star he had not seen with his own eyes in 14 years resolve slowly into the only home either half of him had ever truly had, and did not yet know that somewhere below him on a world he had not set foot on in a decade and a half, the woman he loved was already being shaken awake to receive him. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button, subscribe to the channel to help it grow, and leave a comment.